the tarot was, what the historians say is that the game of cards was first, basically end of 13th century. The cards, like the cards as we know them, like what they call the French suits, which are the ones the spades and hearts and clubs and diamonds, were the suits from the north of Europe, and the south of Europe had the what's called the Italian suits, but they're also working in Spain, which are the same but in a different guise. So the swords are the spades, and the cups are the hearts, and the clubs are the clubs or the wands, and the coins, I don't like to call them pentacles because, as you can see, there's no pentacle in there, but got the Rider-Waite deck later. The coins are the diamonds. So the game of card existed, and because paper doesn't stay alive for 6 centuries or 5 centuries or 7 centuries, we know of them because they were prohibited in the army and they were taxed, and they were also prohibited by the church because the games of cards were considered a distraction from the essential, which is, to focus on salvation and God and praying, etc., etc. And after a century and a half, we don't know how, we don't know where from. I did extensive research on it, on a book that wasn't published in English yet, but that's called Tarot Step by Step. That's in other languages. Someone invented the suit of the trumps that are completely different. They are numbered and they have names. So this is the Hanged Man, this is the Empress, this is the Emperor. This one fell, it's interesting, it's the Wheel of Fortune and the Hermit. And so initially they were not numbered, and they were just images that referred to both the profane and the sacred, with a little bit of the flair of what happens in the carnaval, in the how to say, in the after the Mardi Gras, when everybody walks around and burns.
Yeah, the carnival, yeah.
The carnival, yeah. So it looked like both a spiritual object and a not so spiritual object, because you have, the devil that has, like, the Wheel of Fortune, that's more of a Roman symbol because the fortune was a very important Roman goddess, or you have the Hanged Man that comes from, that's the wanted, the wanted manifesto that from the Renaissance Italy, when someone had done something really wrong in one of the Italian republics, but they couldn't catch them. They would figure, it's called pittura d'infamia, paintings of infamy, and they would depict them hung by a foot, which was a way of saying if anyone saw them, because their name was there, they should be
captured
taken prisoner, but they were also to shame them, but it also means that you get away with it. And then there's pagan symbols like the moon, and then there's symbols that look like they're directly taken from the Bible, but also there's a card that unfortunately the Rider-Waite called the High Priestess, but she's actually called the Popess, which is a very bold, affirmation, because if the Pope has a Popess, not by his side, but at the back of himself, it refers to all the feminine gatherings of wise women at the time, like the Begin, or the role of the women in the Qatar movements that were either burned or their books were burned. So, but you also have a very strong figure of the Middle Age and Renaissance, that is death, etc., etc. So it's a very mysterious series of symbols, and their function in the game at the time was to represent a suit that could beat the kings and queens and, court cards of every other suit. So as a teenager, I played a lot of tarot, not with this version, because this version was abandoned by the players in the mid-19th century. It's the new tarot. I think Francis...
And you had no idea of it as being a kind of symbol system of contemplation. You just thought of it as a fun game.
I was a born schoolgirl. Playing under the table during class, when we had a very boring teacher, we would go on with the game that we had been playing during lunch break, hiding the cards, etc. And it's very hard because there's 5 players in the tarot. There's 5 players. The one who bets that he or she's gonna win according to their hand calls one king that's not in their own game. Then he or she takes the leftover cards on the table called the dog, le chien, and they, without anyone's knowledge, put back cards so they can create a clean cut They can decide that they will have no hearts or no spades or whatever, which allows them to play the trumps. Because the very interesting fact for the game and very interesting fact for the initiatic view on the tarot is that you can only play trump if A, trump is the first card played on the round. They say la couleur demandée, no? The suit that's, I don't know, I never played cards in English, so I don't know how you say in English, but like the suit that's in the round. Or if you have exhausted or don't have any card in the color that is asked for. So it's very interesting from the point of view of the game. Bridge and other games that use the notion of trump were born from the tarot. That's why the game became so popular, basically from the 16th, 17th century, all the way into the 19th century, where it declined because so many other games had been invented. And that's the reason why the industry of tarot making was a very profitable one. And what happened is that the first known games were made in Italy. Yeah. But then at the end of the 1600s, Italy had a very big breakdown economically because of some war. I can't tell you what it is because I have a very bad memory for dates right now. I have it written somewhere. And France took over. And this model, which is now known as Tarot of Marseille, but which was actually printed in most of the important French cities, including Avignon, that was not French at the time, but that was the cities of the Pope. It's important because they didn't have taxes on the card games. So a lot of tarot were produced in Avignon. It was a bit like the Luxembourg of Switzerland of the time.
So when people were using this, and originally, did they have any idea of the, mystical religious symbolism, yes, or was it just simply a game that they were playing for fun?
It was both. I think in the Italy of the 15th and 16th century, because the trumps were not even named or numbered, it was self-evident what the hierarchy was. In the different cities, because it was placed in Bologna, Ferrara, etc., the hierarchy was different. That's why, for instance, the Rider-Waite deck has a slightly different numerology from the Marseille deck, because they went and took a tarot, they copied some tarot from the 15th or 16th century. That's different from the Marseille's model. So at the time, for instance, the judgment oftentimes was the highest card. It was called the angel. And then, of course, it got lost. It just became a game, But on the other hand, if you look at, I don't know, Super Mario or Pokemon or whatever, there's dragons in the Pokemon. And dragons are also a very initiative symbol. So you never know how much of an intention of wisdom was put into it.
Right. Because it might be, 99% of it might be completely unconscious, but there's still sort of archetypal symbols operating on some level. Yeah.
Yes. And in the French, so all these are hypotheses because I did extensive research I like to do research and to try not to say stupid things, or things that are unfounded. And there is no evidence of where it came from, who invented it, etc. But we do know that the French tradition of craftsmanship was very deeply rooted in what gave birth to the Mason philosophy after that. And also, of course, that the whole tarot was very deeply based in the spirit of the Italian Renaissance. So Pythagorean numerology, esoteric Christianity, all of that is absolutely.
And the Kabbalah as well. People always try to attach, do correspondence of the tarot to the Hebrew letters and things like that, right? Or is that just a made up thing?
I think it's a little bit, the 19th century was a little bit of the first New Age.
Yeah.
There's a lot of what you get from the occult writers and occult traditions from the 19th century. That's a little bit like the New Age of now, where you have to filter a lot of things, but also the same way that in the 70s, there were some amazing Western, 70s and before that, but, Western spiritual teachers or some people who really initiate. So you really have to look for the pearl in the mud. So it's more of how do you say, concordantism? You know, like when the bad
Correspondences. Well,
no,
when
no,
I read Crowley's book, it's just endless correspondences
no,
with
no, that's
symbols.
not what I mean.
Oh,
What I
that's
mean,
not what you mean. Sorry.
no,
Okay.
I mean the ugly sisters of the Cenerentola, la Cendrillon. My God, what's her name? The one who's picking.
Cinderella.
Yeah,
Okay.
Cinderella's ugly sisters
Right,
cutting
right.
to enter the shoe.
Okay, got it. Got to
You know
enter.
what? So
Mhm.
because there were 22 cards and
Yeah.
because Kabbalah was very fashionable in the 19th century, they tried to create a concordance with it. Obviously, 22 is an initiatic number. It's a
Yeah.
master number in numerology. It's the number of letters that the Hebrew alphabet has,
Yeah.
but it's not necessarily corresponding, you know?
Mhm.
So to come back, because I'm going all over the place, at the time I had no idea. I was playing tarot. It was very funny. Contrary to a lot of people who study the tarot, I do have the influx, the psychological and even spiritual influx of the game.
Mhm.
And, you know, Lee Lozowick, I know you did a podcast with
Mhm.
one of his students. Lee Lozowick, for instance, was playing bridge with his students because
Right. Yeah, that's
he
true.
found that the game of cards was a work on self-observation and attention for so many reasons. And I don't want to speak in the name of Lee, who was a revered teacher, but he was not my teacher.
Mhm.
But one of the reasons is that your adversaries change with every round. So it's a game of being with and against. And so it's one of the ways that you learn not to be fixed in your likes and dislikes. You learn to lose. You learn to do your best to win. You learn that if you lack attention for 1 second and you don't calculate enough, life flies you by, you know? So I had that in my bones.
Mhm.
Then my mom gave me a book about cards reading for many reasons I'm not going to develop now when I was 17. And it was with the basic poker cards. And there I found that some people had the idea to correspond the numbered card, the pip cards as they call them in English,
Mhm.
with meanings. And it
Yeah.
blew my mind. I was like, wow, there's a language of symbols and numbers.
Mhm.
So I started playing with that. And of course, I went crazy and I blew a fuse, like anyone who goes too far with the symbols
Mhm.
and does too many readings for people who are too much in distress. Because when you're 18, you cannot hold someone with, you know, deep heartbreak or terminal cancer. It's way
Mhm.
too much for you. And so at some point, I threw everything to the garbage. I had so many tarots and you know, I had collected them and I was power hungry. I wanted to,
Mhm.
but I
Yeah,
remember
I
the
wonder if there's a way, sorry to interrupt, that the way that if you go too deep into that esoteric stuff, it leads to madness. You know.
no, no, if you go too deep into something that doesn't have a core
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
that brings you close to reality. That's the
Mm.
reason why I don't want to, you know, badmouth the new age or the age of occultism. But there is so much neurosis and so much daydreaming and so much um, ambition of the thinking mind in all
Mm.
these tables of correspondences that, you know, this planet is this color, is this and that.
Yeah.
And it's the same with the spiritual teachings. If you don't go back to like doing the dishes and trying to have basic kindness with people and trying not to let your negative emotions, if they appear, they do, but like run all over the place, what is even the reason to study anything? So in the world of tarot, what happened was that when the game lost its momentum in the 19th century and just remained in France with an easier deck that is completely bourgeois, it's people eating on the grass and theater
Mm.
figures and stuff. The games remained there, and it was a time with a lot of fortune telling. It was a time of the Industrial Revolution with
Yeah.
a lot of misery, a very, very deep crushing of the feminine with the corset and all the work on hysteria and the bourgeois marriages and with the women from the lower
Mhm.
classes, the raping from their bosses and everything and all that. So the feminine was very crushed. Catholicism had turned into completely political and manipulative religion at the time. There
Yeah.
was almost no trace left of the mystic and the depth of it. And so, of course, what people were asking for to the fortune tellers were it was like a whole, you know, field of despair and rage and tragedy and melodrama. And the literature of that time is like that. It's the romantic literature in France, I mean, the romantic literature, the feuilleton of Eugène Sue or Alexandre Dumas. So the tarot, as when it began as a subject of study for the occultists and for the people who were doing magic, at the same time, it became this object that was dragged in the mud with fortune tellers that were trying to gain power over the people who came to see them, because psychology didn't exist at the time.
So sort of pre-psychoanalysis, you mean?
Yeah,
or around the same time of psychoanalysis.
whatever, pre-coaching, pre-motivational speakers, call it what you want.
Yeah.
Suddenly something happens in the 1920s, 1940s, yeah. In the 1930s, the Surrealists edit one issue of the Minotaur Review with a tarot on the cover.
Yeah.
Because they were interested in everything that was naive art. And they saw it as naive art. And then they got arrested and they fled to Marseille, as you know, with the American Committee for the Artists. And they were very afraid at the time, before Peggy Guggenheim brought them all to Americas. And at that moment, André Breton studied in the Marseille library, and he understood something about the tarot. Yeah. And they created a game at the time that was a game of cards, but that was influenced by Breton reading about the tarot.
Yeah, in your book you recount, or Jodorowsky talks about meeting Breton, right?
Yes.
And there's a moment where he says that this is the real thing, the Marseille tarot, because he really respected that on some level. He didn't understand it, but he respected that. I thought that was an interesting statement. Yeah.
So that was in the 50s when Jodorowsky came to France in the 1953, and he was looking for Breton because it was model, and also Leonora Carrington, the surrealist painter, she was very knowledgeable in the tarot. So Breton had met the tarot in Marseille. Leonora had met it probably through the surrealists and then through the books she read in Mexico. And Breton had been dumped by his wife, Jacqueline, the mother of his child, Aube, and he met the last woman of his life, Elisa, the Chilean woman, and he wrote Arcana 17, which was first published with a painting by Mata, but which was then published with the Star of the Tarot on the cover. And for me, that's the rebirth of the tarot through poetry and the study of the subconscious. That's the moment when all this influx of like really coarse and like power-oriented and negative and like desperate, I would say rather desperate fortune-telling meets the very notion that there also is an incredible wisdom in the subconscious. And the next act, which for me is very important, because Jodorowsky was in love with the occult. He loved Eliphas Levi. He had this flair for all these like things from the 19th century because he was very, very masculine. So he loved, he loved the occult as a science. I have a more simple and a more, I think, feminine approach where the truth resonates through the body. I like a pristine teaching, even if it's very dire and very demanding. I like things that go like this. So for me, it was always really super mumbo jumbo, all this like, and very like, ballsy, all this 19th century. And I've always had this feeling with the Rider-Waite. I was like, this is like an endless fantasy novel. And Italo Calvino, at some point, read in the 50s or 60s, I don't know where, the Castle of Cross Destinies. I don't know when it dates back from exactly. But he read that thesis, university thesis of someone who said, fortune telling is an art of storytelling. So he chose tarot, one Italian tarot and the Marseille tarot. And he wrote that book a little bit with the Oulipo idea of like, writing under constraint. And he presented the tarot as a storytelling device. And that's exactly what it is. Because the Renaissance, which is the bottom of where the tarot, has its roots, is reinventing the story of man after we got expelled from the center of the world. If we revolve around the sun, then man has to be made of all the matter of the universe. And then the Renaissance human being has the capacity to gather, even in a pack of cards, the whole story of the cosmos. Very Gurdjieffian.
So that's like, if I'm understanding correctly, so the story of the cosmos, the entire mandala, sort of coming together in these symbols, or and then so they're separate cards, but you throw them around and you put them together, and so you're sort of rebuilding the cosmic story as you're playing with the cards.
Well, the thing you have to do with the Marseille Tarot, so the Marseille Tarot has a specificity.
Yeah.
It started being produced in France, probably in the state we know it, not in the 16th century, because there are so many different tarots in the 16th, probably in the mid 17th century.
Mm-hmm.
And it stems from both the Italian games of cards with the pip cards, and from a certain understanding of numerology. So its specificity is that the trump cards are connected numerologically with the cards 1 to 10. It has both. I'm not going to give you a course in tarot, but basically what's important to understand is that we have a numerology of 10, which is the possible action of man, 2 hands.
Right.
And we have the numerology of 7, which we know from Gurdjieff is the numerology of the cosmic law.
And the arcana, there's the 10 above and the 10 below, right? Or something like that.
So so one of the ways you can look, now I've mixed the cards to have fun with why we got cut off. So I'm gonna put them back because it's an optical language. I was talking about Leonora Carrington. It's very important. She's coming back in fashion. She was almost ignored for years. She was actually studying with the Gurdjieff groups in Mexico. And she was such a knowledgeable and genius woman. Not this Biennale in Venice, but the former Biennale was named after a book of hers, The Milk of Dreams. And she was the one. She was even more important than André Breton, because she was the one who told Jodorowsky, you don't have to study tarot. It's an optical language. Look for the meaning of the cards in the cards themselves. And that's how Jodorowsky started to study the tarot. And because he was a genius of seeing, I mean, there's things that I disagree with in his, we were very close for 16 years in our lives. But one thing I have endless gratitude for what he found about the tarot and what he taught me. And one of the things about him is that he has X-ray and lasers in his eyes, and he sees things, and he has an intelligence that catches the symbols. So one of the ways you can look at the 22 major arcanas is you can take the first and the last, which are the full not numbered, and the world 21, 3 times 7. And you can look at them like almost the sperm and the ovum, like the alpha and the omega. And it's just like the 2 pillars that hold the decimal and the numerology in 10 together. And from that, you can play with 1 has its counterpart in 11. And as you can see, they have the same hat. And then 2 has her counterpart in 12. And as you can see, she's like almost a mother or a mother hen, inside the temple, holding a treasure. And he is like suspended or in meditation. He could be the child in her womb. And then you have a very classical, the maiden and death, or the killing mother and the loving mother together. And then you have in heaven as on earth, etc., etc. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. So the numerology in 10 that you find in the cards from 1 to 10 also, and they have a lot of connections together, is the one that is the most useful for tarot readings, because people are asking generally for psychological questions, or things that have to do with working and loving, basically. Yeah. And so it gives you incredible keys, because 10 is my 2 hands. So we count to 10 because that's the way we do, that's the way we grab the world, and we also have 10 toes. So as you can see, the magician starts with a interesting hand that looks like it has one more finger, and he draws attention on his hand while he plays this game that he's going to rip you off with. And strength is the only card that has a naked foot. This tarot is a facsimile from 1709. It's the oldest tarot of Marseille that has been kept.
The fourth one is the oldest one.
It's
or the whole series.
It's the only one, the oldest one that has been kept intact with all its cards. It's called the Tarot Madonier, and it was not made in Marseille, it was made in Dijon, because Marseille was the place where those tarot ended up being made in the 19th century. But actually from 17th through 19th centuries, they were made in many, many cities in France. It's the French. So the numerology of 10 has an incredible coherence. You've read about it in George Gurdjieff's book. I was the one who worked on the numerology in 7, so it's not in that book. It's not even in my new book. Then another way we can look at it, it's 3 times 7. And for anyone who's even merely Gurdjieffian, 3 times 7 will mean a lot. Yeah. So then we have one series of 7, which is all the possible ways of the world, power, study, triumph, relationship, religion, blah, blah, blah. And then we have another series of 7 where, as if by chance, you find in first, third, and last place the 3 of the 4 cardinal virtues, justice, strength, and temperance, and which is a completely ascetic kind of journey. So the world, the virtues, and of course, affirmation, negation, holy conciliation, which is with whom? Beelzebub. So you start with the devil.
Oh, that's Beelzebub. That's great. I hadn't made that connection yet.
But Tarot is Gurdjieffian. And what's so sad is that Ouspensky wrote the lamest book on the tarot that you can find in the whole wide world, because he wrote it before he met Gurdjieff, and he just read Waite's book, and he's based it on the Rider-Waite deck that we might or might not talk about, and he didn't see. And so the last suit is both. So it starts with going in and looking at duality and looking at our double nature, and then all the cards have both a cosmic and a human dimension, and it's the reconciliation. So that aspect of the tarot is initiatic. I use it for myself and for people. It's not the thing you will teach for basic readings. And when you look at it this way, it solves a very strange thing, which is that the tarot has 4 court cards and not 3. It has the page,
right,
and the queen, and the king, and the knight. So one of the reasons for that, most probably, is that it also stems from the Middle Age tradition, where chivalry was very important. So the knight is inferior to the king and queen in social status, but he's superior in spiritual status because he's the one who will go into the quest. He is officially and outwardly armed by the king, but he is inwardly burnt by the love of the queen. And the same way that the fool, or le mat, is the pilgrim, and it's the essential figure of the spiritual seeker in the legend Renaissance, the knight is the essential figure of the spiritual seeker in the Renaissance also. But the other implication of that is that with 10 pip cards and 4 court cards, you have 14 minor arcana, which are 2 times 7. It's very interesting because the tarot is giving us a double numerology, one that is our abilities as human beings, and one that is the ray of creation, the octave.
So the 7 is more related to, let's say, time, and like, because I think there's 7 days.
7 is related to the essential law of any phenomenon existing in the cosmos beyond our likes and dislikes. It's the idea of the Trump so I have to come back to that, the trump, which is the triumph, which is the card that triumphs upon any other card. So what is the implication of I have to be devoid of any cards in the suit of hearts so that I can play my trump? It means I have exhausted the ambition of my lower emotional center, the one that wants to be loved and wants to get and wants to this and that and has sentimentality, so that I can start to use or start to see or start to have to live up to the resource in me, which is beyond time and space.
So the Trump almost represents quote unquote freedom from this mechanical man that Gurdjieff would talk about, or something
or
like
the
that.
condition thereof, which is why you can find either a symbol of power.
Okay.
So any of the trumps, the way I read them, can be something that both triumphs over you and humbles you and brings you to your knees.
Right.
But that will then become something that you integrate to keep triumphing upon the return of your egotistic nature.
Oh, very interesting.
No?
So it's the
that's
two movements. One is the humbling movement, and the next is this sort of moving outward. I don't know if I'm saying it, or conquering your own small self or small identity.
Look at this card. No one wants it because it's a skeleton.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you look at it from the point of view, it triumphs over me. Impermanence keeps triumphing over me.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, it's a skeleton. It's a flesh-colored skeleton.
It's got flesh on it. Yeah. That's amazing.
So that means it's also the skeleton I have inside. So impermanence is the way to discover inside of me that which is not to be destroyed.
Right.
And it's
clearing the ground of he's kind of clearing the ground. He's like an editor. He's getting rid of the excess.
Are you sure it's a he?
I don't know. I'm sorry, but I always thought it was. But
I'm sorry. I'm not a raging feminist. I'm just asking.
It could be wrong. Yeah, no, that could be a she. Is it a she, or are you telling me it's a she, or it's androgynous, right?
I think
are they all androgynous, or?
I think it's one of those cards in the tarot that's beyond the he and the she.
Right. Okay.
So I once answered an interview for a right-wing Spanish magazine that ended up being titled "The Tarot is Queer," so that stirred a lot of different reactions. But it's true that the tarot also involves this notion. It has basic couples, like literally the Emperor and the Empress. They're a couple, the Pope and the Popess, etc. But it also presents cards that are literally beyond gender, it's really interesting because, for instance, temperance doesn't have an article in French. It's not le tempérance or la tempérance.
Okay.
Or those two characters that emerge from the tower in the house of God, you don't know if they're male or female. And then it presents naked women, and then it presents naked men. And there's, of course, the devil that is a bi-gendered being because it has both the feminine and the masculine attributes,
Yeah.
So it's very interesting because it takes into account the essential diversity of the human being.
So, sorry to interrupt. I had this question about the tarot, actually. It's like, is it saying implicitly like what can't be expressed explicitly in religion, like, especially because it grew up in a kind of a Christian world, and is it saying the things that you can't say in the church, just through hidden symbols, like things that need to be hidden? So is there a lot that's hidden that is reveals itself through time? Is my question clear, or?
Yeah, your question is clear. My answer might not be that clear. The way you pose the question is a way that I can't answer directly because my only answer would be I don't know. And yet I'm kind of knowledgeable about the tarot. So if I may, I will go another way. I will say it brings a language of images and symbols. If we look at them, we keep discovering things. I've been studying the tarot for almost 30 years. It keeps surprising me. So it's an endless source of symbolic inspiration. Mr. Gurdjieff said that the language of the higher emotional center is the myth and that the language of the higher intellectual center is symbol. When I discovered that, I think it's in Ouspensky, I was very touched because it gathers the two meanings of the tarot. When you read the tarot to someone, you are trying to give a mythical account of what could be an answer to their question. What does it mean? It means that any question that is asked and any question that needs to be asked is always egocentrical. It's my problem, my difficulty, my conflict, my confusion. And the response that is awaited is a response that unifies and brings a deep acceptance. So the response is always trying to walk in the direction of the spiritual, of the death of the ego or the surrender of the ego. The only way we can do that as tarot readers, because we're small people, is by trying to be inspired by the card to find a mythical answer through reading the symbols. So it's a device that calls the higher emotional and intellectual centers into action by deeply listening to another human being and trying to take in their world and, to our best knowledge, invent a story that will make sense for them. And
or mythical world that they can inhabit and function in, because they have all this chaos in their mind, and these figures can. What we all have a chaos. We have chaos in our mind, and we need a language to understand the kind of things that can't be easily,
but it can be
reduced to formula, or
it can be a very simple answer. I will give you an example after that, but I would like to say something. So my root teacher in tarot, who was Jodorowsky, and I thank him for that, he would always say, if it's not true, it's well invented. And also he invented a saying of the Buddha, which I never found anyone in the Buddha, so I think it's a saying of the Jodorowsky, which said, truth is whatever is useful. It's not high
skillful means,
it's exactly. So what I learned from him was to look at the tarot as an organized whole with a very simple structure. We are going to look at anything connected to needs, time, space, and money from this suit. We are going to look at the emotional life from this suit. We are going to look at the intellectual life and the symbolic meanings of things from this suit and communication. And this suit is the suit of creative, moving center, sexuality, anything that moves us. And then we apply the numerology. And then we look at the trump cards with all their symbology and all their numerology. And then we add to that the meaning of the court cards, where this is the beginner, the child, the spirit of innocence, the capacity to absorb a lot. This and this are the feminine and the masculine in their responsible state. She working from the concave and he working from the convex. And this is the going beyond, the giving up, and the finding out. So if you start applying this vocabulary, I don't know if it's true. I don't know if it is what the inventors of the tarot meant. The only thing I can testify is that after 30 years of very earnest and dedicated practice, it still works for me and for the people that I still sometimes read for. It's not my main activity. It's just something I practice. And I really need to tell you, it's an ongoing miracle. It keeps deepening. The more I study, I was not initially a Gurdjieffian. I'm a student of Arnaud Desjardins, but I started out with 10 years in the Gurdjieff groups. And I've been very, very passionate about the Gurdjieffian teachings for the last maybe 10 years also. And I started finding out more and more and more and more coherence. If I read the Upanishads, I find coherence. Every time I open a really, truly, deeply sacred book, I start finding that the structure of the tarot as a holy architecture has the capacity to resonate with it. Who did it? I don't know. Why? I don't know. Will I ever exhaust its meaning? I probably won't.
Yeah.
Works.
Uh-huh. Well, I guess that is the definition of a spiritual system or text or
Divine.
symbology, is that it has an infinite potential uh, of uh, of insight which can emerge from it.
I would say my bet would be that it is the Western equivalent of a yantra
Uh-huh, uh-huh. Right. Yeah.
and of a myth.
Yeah. Well, this is why I wonder if it was kind of hidden, because in the East, these things are more explicit, maybe, and in the West, people had to hide a lot of things.
Maybe.
Um,
I
so
know it's Jodorowsky's theory. That's what he
yeah,
thinks.
yeah.
I was looking for historical proof of that. And for now, the only thing I have found, also, Idris Shah, he
Hmm.
said that the tarot came from a Sufi master. So I
Right.
looked very much in that direction. The great popular spiritual thinkers of the 20th century, Carlos Castaneda,
Hmm.
Jodorowsky, Oscar Ichazo, Idris Shah, they're tricksters.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So I like them and I respect them. I maybe don't fully buy into what they say.
Hmm.
I think they're more benefactors and inspirers.
Yeah. Well, maybe a bit like Carl Jung or something, that they make a lot of mistakes, but then their students have to figure it out after they're gone. They have to sort of clarify their grand gestures.
So, I followed Idris Shah's notion and I said, okay, is there any root for a game of cards that had very deep, because he says it's a Sufi teacher who created the cards for his students,
Uh,
which sounded amazing. And the only thing I found, but that feels kind of relevant, is that there is a Tibetan branch of the Tibetan Buddhism where they have what they call chaklis or chakalis, which
mhm.
are like almost portable altar cards.
Oh, Shanda, yeah, those cards. Yeah, sure,
Yeah,
sure.
that were either drawn by the master for the teacher or
Hmm.
the student, no, by the master for the student, or the
Yeah.
student had to draw them. So it's one of the possible sources.
But
The
I've
thing
seen those, but they
that
don't
are
seem to have
not.
such a coherent kind of narrative as the tarot. They seem to be more like, this it represents, this represents that. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there is a coherent narrative that I just
No,
don't
no,
understand it. It's not my. But
no,
the tarot seems to be sort of, there's a way in which, at least how Jodorowsky describes it, it has a sort of coherent language, right?
well, what I think is maybe we're not looking in the right direction because we're looking at decks that were basically made last 16th through early 19th century.
Right.
And there were games of cards in China, in India, in so many places before that, and also initiatic games like some of the board games. There's a whole story of the board games that is also very initiatic. So maybe if we look for a wholly perfect origin, which is a very masculine thing to do because it's
Mm.
like the initial sperm that breeds the first male, maybe
Hmm.
in the wrong direction. And maybe it's more a question of layers. And maybe it got enriched little by little. And it started like something that had some roots in some meanings. And then someone took it and said, wow, that's interesting. We could add this. And then someone else took it. And suddenly, after 5, 6, 7 centuries, sometime in the 1700s, it became this like
Okay.
amazing sum. One example is like the card of the Fool in this tarot from 1709, he's followed by a fox or by a cat.
Yeah.
And in the later tarot, he's followed by a dog.
Yeah.
This is the testimony of the fact that the figure of Saint Roch, who was the healer of the plague,
Uh-huh.
got mixed with the figure of the fool. So that's
Uh-huh.
an enrichment, for instance.
Uh-huh.
You
Right. Right.
understand what I mean?
Right.
And this is a historical story.
Mm.
Strength, who was initially just a woman with a lion, got enriched with Saint Blandine, who was the saint patron of the city of Lyon. So
Okay.
maybe it's a layering
So there's
history.
no like platonic coherent model of what it is. It's more like a process.
It it's just a hypothesis.
It's just it's
I'm
a
sorry, I have nothing but hypothesis and practice and
yeah.
embodied feelings. That's
No,
just
it's interesting what you're saying about, the masculine tendency to try to systemize something, over systemize something, which kind of needs to be balanced by remembering the mystery of the thing. I wonder why, and yeah, I mean, most of the kind of new age books about the tarot and the tarot in pop culture seems to be a feminine phenomenon. I mean, I don't know if that's. I mean, I had to translate some very flaky New Age
yes.
tarot books, and it seems to be, yeah, it seems to be. On the one hand, there's this over systematization of the whole Crowley movement, and it's like, everything has to be correspondent to everything else, and then on the other hand, there's this, fluid mysticism which doesn't have any grounding. So I guess we have to find somewhere in between, or
But the proof is in the cake.
yeah,
That means like someone comes to you and they have something that's deeply bothering them.
yeah,
And then the cards, simply three cards are drawn, and suddenly it becomes clearer,
yeah,
both
yeah.
for the reader. For me, that's the only way. If that happens, it's great. I am sometimes invited to tarot congresses, and I tend not to go because I'm not very fond of these things. But once I had the opportunity to meet one of the top Rider-Waite readers of the world. So,
Mhm.
and she was a very nice lady. And so I like to expose myself. So I asked her for a reading. It was sweet, but it didn't make any sense.
Mhm, mhm.
And I encounter that a lot. So, and on the other hand, when I give a tarot to a 12-year-old child and I give him the major arcana and I ask him to tell me a story, wonderful things happen. So it's also a device that brings you back to simplicity.
Yeah.
And from simplicity, you can build and create more and more and more meaning.
I think that's what I really loved about your book, actually. Your book with with Jodorowsky.
You
That
can believe my book, I wrote 80% of it.
you wrote 80% of it, so it really is your book. So anyway, but it feels like a book that is it's full of clarity, right? Whereas a lot of tarot material is really muddy
Yeah.
and
Yeah, that's how
confused.
I ended up having nightmares and dreaming of the devil and hearing voices when I was 18, because
Yeah.
I was like dipped in that material, which is the only thing that was to be found at the time. So I completely abandoned the tarot for 10 years. And when I was 29, a friend took me to a cafe where Jodorowsky was reading, and she said that man saved my life. She was going through a very hard breakup, and he did a reading for her, and in like 5 minutes he turned her world over because he was quite the magician.
Yeah.
So, I went, I had a bad flu, and for me, Jodorowsky was just a comic book writer.
Yeah.
He walked in with his two sons, and they looked like a South American parade of machismo and whatever. I was like, ugh. And I just stood because everyone could witness him reading at the time. So it was this lousy cafe, very dirty, with people
I know
drunk
the cafe. Yeah, I
and
think.
they were smoking and stuff. And I will remember my whole life because I knew the cards. The woman asked some question. I was standing to the back of her, and Jodorowsky, with a very elegant gesture, turned the card over because the cards were face down. And he had this, like, tea ceremony kind of movement. And he said, oh, with his finger like that. He always showed the cards like that with his hand open. Oh, the chariot, action in the world. That word opened up something here. I was like, this man knows.
Hmm.
And the next thing you knew, I was going to his classes, and I knew he knew. There was a clarity about him.
Yeah.
And he gave something amazing to the world, which he owes to André Breton. And that's why I situate myself in the lineage of surrealism, and which he owes to Leonora Carrington. And now that the Leonora Carrington tarot is out, I just wrote an article about that tarot for a book about her. So I really went very deep into it. and she just channeled the major arcana in a way that's incredible. That woman was a seer, and she was the one. He directed a play of hers in Mexico, and they were kind of friends for a
Wow.
time.
So there's a lineage really.
It is a lineage.
Yeah.
So my lineage, that the one I got from Jodorowsky, much more than the lineage of occultism, is the lineage of the seers in art.
Hmm.
Except for me, the surrealism was lacking the spiritual aspect. Leonora Carrington wasn't, and the way I practiced the tarot is it irresistibly it became closer and closer and closer at the service of the path in terms of just becoming truer human beings. And so that's the way, at least I understand it. And that's the way I work with it and serve it.
Hmm. So yeah, one of the things about surrealism is dreams, right? And
Yeah.
I think that the arcana have a dreamlike quality, and
So
they get under the literalism or the more, as you say, masculine, maybe just theoretical aspect of thinking.
So, in that direction, what I would say is another quote from my root teacher, from Jodorowsky. He had those two wonderful ideas, psychomagic,
Yeah.
which is designing a specific ceremony, individual one-time ceremony to solve a person's knot. He defined this as in psychoanalysis, the unconscious has to learn to be tamed, to speak a language understandable by the conscious. In psychomagic, it's the reverse. The conscious goes deep into the magical, symbolic, and poetic, and yes, and metaphorical,
Oh, beautiful.
to be
Yeah.
able to speak to the unconscious. And I lost my way because I got so inspired. What was your question?
Oh, I was talking about dreams.
Dreams.
Yeah.
And he had another amazing notion. He said, interpreting dreams is one way of doing, but we also have to interpret reality as a dream. When we start interpreting reality as a dream,
Yes.
the symbolic and the metaphorical aspect of reality comes out. So what the tarot does is that it gives a metaphorical subtitle to your reality with a lot of symbols that can turn into a storytelling. I often teach tarot as a storytelling device. I work with a choreographer of contemporary dance, and we work on the tarot with the dancers, and she says it's incredible. I've never seen, I mean, her faithful, habitual dancers, she says, I see them doing things they've never done. Because, it's like wearing a mask in the Lecoq tradition of theater. The allegory, they're not archetypes, they're allegory. The allegory kind of like pervades you.
They're
So
not
that,
archetypes. Can you explain that? They're not
yes,
archetypes, but
so
they're allegory.
archetype
Yeah.
is a Jungian notion, and
Yeah.
arche means old. So
Yeah.
Jung basically discovered and presented like structures of the human psyche, of the collective subconscious, that are way older than ourselves, our
Yeah.
family, and our culture. Allegories were a device that flourished in the Renaissance, and it's the notion of describing a body of force, like, for instance, strength, fortitude and strength, or like, for instance, justice and righteousness and balance, which are two cards in the tarot, not with one symbol that would be either, I don't know, an animal or a geometrical figure, but with a scene, either anthropomorphic or a landscape, that is completely intertwined with symbolic elements. So it's like a story made of symbols,
Got it. Yeah.
which is meant to show a force that is very wide but has a specific direction available for any human being, but not necessarily fully awakened in anyone. So this or that aspect of whatever, creativity or, solidity and wealth. That's why you can give keywords for the tarot cards, but they remain dry because they go into your left brain. When you have an allegory, you are presented with something that is a little bit like the Platonic ideas, because the tarot comes from the Renaissance that was Neoplatonician.
Yeah.
So when you're resonating with the allegory, it kind of awakens dormant forces in us. So we become creative, we suddenly see another angle of the situation that we hadn't seen. And so in my view, the tarot reader is a translator of the allegory into a quality of presence, into a tone of voice, into examples, into language, into a questioning process that the consultant can understand, and they can come up with their own relationship with the allegoric tale that is being told by the major arcana. And then the minor arcanas are more like strictly symbolic, because they're, the reason why the Rider-Waite was so successful is that this looks very dry. They're just floating in space. But when you start understanding their language, when you crack their code, it's just like, it's
So, but I have a question about that, because it's very easy to play around, I find, using your book and with the major arcana. But then I always find, like, what the hell do I do with the rest of the cards?
That's why I wrote a second book, and that's why Jodorowsky hates me for it, because when I wrote to him and I said very happily, I'm writing a new book on the tarot, I'd like to use your cards. He was like, no, the way of tarot is like the best that can be, and I forbid you to use my tarot. And he did me a huge favor, because that's how I started inquiring into historical tarots. And that's how I discovered all these wonderful decks. So it was interesting, I was like, okay, I will say a lot of nice things about you, and I'm sorry, but I'm going to write it anyway, because I wanted to bring the capacity for people to work with the minor arcana. And my huge pride is that I have students all over the world who became very decent tarot readers. Of course, if they're also decent human beings, or even better, like earnest spiritual practitioners, it's all the best, but at least they're clever about the tarot, because the language is clear, and most of it is in the way of tarot, but it's too concentrated and kind of hidden, and the pedagogy of reading the minor arcana is not quite enough developed. But it's very easy. I can teach it to you in a day and a half.
In a day and a half.
I'm not going to do this right now, but it's like Chinese medicine, these systems that look so arcane, or like the law of octave and the law of three of Gurdjieff. And that's, that's an answer to a former question you had. It's not that the knowledge is hidden. It's hidden in plain sight.
Yeah.
It's just
it's just that we it's like learning another language. We don't know that language. Once we learn it, it's self-evident, it's easy, right? But
it's hidden in plain sight. For me, it's the image of the hermit.
Yeah.
It's all there. And he's raising the lamp and saying, look, it's here. Look, it's not a snake, it's a cord. But we're all like, where are the stars? Why is the hermit speaking with such a nice voice? Oh, I'm hearing the nightingale. And no one looks and says, oh, it's not a snake, it's a cord. And we all do that with our spiritual teachers, with our therapists, with our martial art teachers.
You mean just like wild interpretations of everything? Whereas I guess the point is to get down to the simplicity, or the bone of the.
We want to be buffered. We want to dream. We want to get drunk and have sex and go back to the past and heal the past, which is impossible. And that's our human condition. We just have to play around with it. So the only reason why I'm still interested with tarot after all these years is that it's one of the so many ways of opening up a little door in the vicious circles we go around and around in a circle with. And with other tools, like a little bit of psychomagic or psychopoetry, as I call it now, there's also ways to do something small, but that makes a difference.
So you said psychomagic and psychopoetry. So how could one use the tarot in that storytelling or poetic process? How can you do that?
So one of the ways is, for instance, one of the very simple things I do is that people, shuffle the cards and do a reading, and maybe they're not happy with the cards that they've drawn. So we go around about how they're not happy with the cards, and it shows the weight of the situation. And then I turn the cards the other way and I open them and I say, okay, choose one you like. And when you do that with the tarot, for people who have never, ever dared to do that, you just open up to them the fact that there is a world of possibility that is actually present and allowed. A lot of the psychomagical acts that Alejandro gave were based on the symbolism of the tarot. The number of days had to do with the number of the card or some of the gestures and things. One of the things he loved doing, I never did it, but he never gave it to me, but he gave it to other people, is, for instance, if someone had a very great fear of being poor and getting lost and stuff, he said, okay, get on a train with no money in your pockets and no ticket and just somewhere and go back home. That's him.
Right.
You know?
Oh, cool.
So
Yeah.
for him, he had a wild imagination. And also, of course, it can be dangerous to do that. That's the reason why whenever people ask me for a symbolic act, I always say now my new technique is you imagine it with all your attention as if you were living it. Then you will know if you need to do it or not. And you can write me after that
Interesting.
if there's something, because the prescription of an act, and it's the same thing, Alejandro came from the patriarchy and he had a public of people who usually were, a lot of them, fatherless. So he felt, when I was working and living with him, he felt that he had to give all that the people didn't have. But the other side of that is the risk of blindness, abuse of power, fascination. I mean, I once met in Argentina a man who had tattooed Jodorowsky's eye on his arm because a woman in Chile told him to do so. And then he's changed his name to Alejandro. That's not good. You
So
understand?
you're describing the cultic powers that can, go around a person when he has that,
Like the song by Eurythmics. Some of them want to abuse you, some of them want to be abused. So we have to be so wary of that. So bringing it back into storytelling, bringing it back into asking the person, what do you see in the card? Bringing it back into now what I do also is that I'm using the Mexican Loteria, the Mexican Tombola bingo. And we also designed a set of cards in the island of Stromboli because it's a very small island. So with an artist, we created an oracle of Stromboli. So I have those much, much lighter oracles. And if the person gets stuck, I say, okay, pick a card from that game. And then, you pick, I don't know, a bee or a prickly pear or something, pear or something. And suddenly, boop, it opens up just because you change the focus of attention. And that's
Right.
very,
So that really is what it's about, isn't it? Changing your attention from this sort of loops that we have, emotional, mental, you know, um, entrapment that we have, and then you have the image gives you something else, gives you another kind of opening of perspective, which can, yeah.
we have a very interesting mythology in our century, and that's the neurosciences. So it's what everybody recurs to now in terms of deities. So we can talk in that language and we can
Yeah.
say that the left brain is preoccupied with words and solutions and cutting things into pieces and putting them into drawers. And the right brain has a sense of unity and a sense of feeling and a sense of kinesthetic coherence. And it's like connected with the whole and everything. The Tarot is somehow a psychedelic device because if you fixate your attention, and I mean, when I was a beginner, I would sometimes do readings that lasted for 3 hours because I would fall into some kind of Ericksonian trance. I had to teach myself to be much more concise and stuff. So yes, it's a right brain, left brain kind of device. In that sense, it's healthy for our nervous system, if that's what you mean.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
But it's not just about that. It also has a mystery of connecting with the great coherence. Jodorowsky said the wisdom of the West. He said a cathedral that you can put in your pocket. He said a book without a binding. He was very good with metaphors. A whole book without binding. It's very versatile. You can't reduce it to one thing.
Right. Yeah, I mean, one thing we haven't talked about, which I think is part of your concern, is the family dynamics, and I know that Jodorowsky did a kind of family constellation with tarot, and
No, he didn't. He was actually he didn't do it with tarot. He 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 was connected with Eric Fromm
Uh-huh.
and with transactional analysis. Is it how it's?
Okay. I'm mixing things up.
And
Yeah.
he did
Uh-huh.
so that's his training, and he did like it's very interesting because I once studied Freud's relationship with Lou Salome, and Lou Salome
Hmm.
was a raging narcissist, which is why
Yeah.
she was an amazing woman. And so Freud knew that you can't analyze narcissists. You have to have tea with them. So he was having tea with Lou Salome on a regular basis, but he did give her the task of analyzing his own daughter. So that's exactly what Jodorowsky describes of his relationship with Fromm. He said, "Oh, we had conversations over tea." So it's the same connection.
Uh-huh.
And
Interesting.
what happened was that the day that he decided to start reading the tarot, because basically he was ruined by Alan Klein. No, not by Alan Klein, by someone he was making a movie with who went away with the money or something. I don't remember. So he was 50 and he had children. He had to make some money. He started doing tarot readings. And because he had worked with actors a lot, he was a theater director,
Yeah.
because he had an idea of the roles in family, because he was interesting. I mean, he came from Latin America, and in Americas, the uh, uh, or solution-oriented therapy was much deeper than psychoanalysis. He had this idea of putting things together and looking. So he had the intuition of transgenerational therapy at the same time that Didier Dumas and Anne-Ancelin Schutzenberger and Bert Hellinger had it.
Okay.
And because he was a theater director and he was giving conferences with hundreds of people coming every Wednesday, free conferences, talks,
Yeah.
he started putting people on stage and having them play their mother and father and sister and brother. And he developed that kind of, like, he called it the theatralization of the family tree. At the same time, and not knowing that, Bert Hellinger was building the constellations. And then he started developing a theory about knots and family. And when I came into his life, I was following a very serious process of Freudian psychoanalysis. So I co-organized with him this work on the family tree with a book that's called Metagenealogy that we co-wrote,
Hmm.
and that developed the idea of studying the language of the family subconscious in the 4 generations of the family tree, not beyond, because after 4 generations, you don't have the 1 degree of separation. Like your parents have known their grandparents, or your
Hmm.
grandparents have known their parents. So you go all the way up until the great grandparents and no further, because then the aspect of like contact is lost, and it's another subconscious that's also very interesting to study, but it's another story. So that's a completely different notion, but I did develop a way of tarot reading where people act the cards, and it's a
Hmm.
very interesting process. And now it's very popular because I taught it in so many countries, and now people do shows with the tarot and and performances, because the arcana possesses you. So you
Hmm.
can make them speak and you can make them dance, but it's much more of a spontaneous improv, kind of like myth in the making kind of work. It does answer questions, but in a poetical way.
I see. So it doesn't go directly into psychoanalysis. It's more.
No, what
uh,
happens is that if you have a background in psychoanalysis or transgenerational therapy, there is a layer of interpretation of the tarot that can go in that direction. And when people don't specifically ask for it, I wouldn't recommend going in that direction, because it's a bit of a savage analyzing of people and it's rude. But
right.
when
Mhm.
there is a psychological component, you can kind of like.
Why is it savage and rude? Because it's too direct or and
Because
energetically or.
I've seen a lot of people who never worked on themselves psychologically and who do
Mhm.
not have the emotional humility of knowing what it means to be overwhelmed by a specific emotion and then finding out about the root of it and then finding peace, which is a whole
Mhm.
experiential process, juggle with psychological concept and kind of like, glue them on the tarot. And it's usually not useful, and it's kind of like
So
a
it works more for coaching or for just giving, rather than actual like dealing with people with real trauma or.
well, if you do have a background in psychotherapy or any kind of therapy, then there is a whole field in the tarot. The tarot applies to everything.
Yeah,
You bring
everything.
it
Okay.
to the workplace, it speaks. I mean, sometimes I can give advice with the tarot to someone who works in contexts I have no idea about, but I give the person, it's like an ideogram. I give them the basic meanings of the cards and they make sense of it, you know? So it also works with the psychological field. And in that sense, because it has a lot of characters, it's interesting because it can describe a whole family or a whole lineage. But it's not that it gives you the wisdom to um, understand the person deeply. So I wouldn't recommend playing with psychological tarot if you don't have some kind of commitment to working with your own psyche. It's always the same. You wouldn't, I mean, you can use tarot for inspiration in painting or writing, but if you're not a painter or a writer, what are you going to do? It's going to be lame, you know?
Got it. Yeah. Interesting. So what's like in this huge journey you're taking? Where are you going with this? What's happening with you and this? And what are you doing right now? Maybe you can tell our listeners, like,
Okay.
if somebody might be inspired by what you're saying,
Yeah. Well,
where do you go with this?
I have I'm in a very specific moment of my life because both my parents are aging and I have come to the moment when I'm required much more than I was. So I'm right now and for some months and probably for the next for I don't know how long, I'm very deeply required by that holy duty of being there for them in that last moment of their lives. And also, I really need to sit and write something both about the numerology of seven that I mentioned to you and about another book about the psycho-poetical field and how it can be taught. So I'm more in an inward direction right now. I haven't been doing a lot of consultations or stuff like that for a long time, but I still do, I work with sometimes museums and I work in Spain and Italy and Latin America when available, and sometimes in English in Berlin or other places like that. I'm not at all hungry for students or fame or anything like that. I never was, and even less now. I do have an Instagram that's called Marianne Costa in just one word, and I do have a Facebook, and I'm very lazy going on it, but I'm very earnest in answering messages that come on it. But I'm not in a very ambitious moment, so I guess it's more like, catch me if you can.
Okay, cool. Well, anyway, yeah, I
Am I
think
disappointing?
absolutely not. I think this is wonderful. No, 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 no. No, it was, yeah. I mean, there's a lot I could, I want to ask you a lot more things about the, about the cards specifically. And so perhaps we could do it again sometime and go deeper if you
Or
were
maybe now,
interested.
what is the card that puzzles you the most?
What is the card that puzzles me the most?
Yeah, let's do a little bit of practical. I mean,
Ah,
the main
um,
information of this podcast is that Mr. Gurdjieff lives. So
he
everything else
definitely lives.
on
Yeah.
top of it,
Yeah. Yeah. What puzzles me the most? What puzzles me the most? That's a good question. I mean, I could say that the card that I fall in love with and the card
Go ahead.
that I like, and then there's the cards which kind of
Your
make
favorite
me
and your
cold,
most
or
hated one.
my most hated one.
Yes. And you
Uh probably
today.
well, I have a difficult relationship with the tower. I like the tower, but I it's actually my tower has got a rip in it. Um
Show me your
and
tower. If I may.
it's a
Show,
chaotic revolutionary card, and I
show
think
us your tower.
I might even, oh, here it is. Yes, it's got a rip. No, Maison Dieu. It's
Yeah.
it's got a little rip in it, you see.
Yeah. Wow. So it's Jodo's tarot.
It's
Huh?
Giotto's Terra, yes, indeed.
Yes. So first and foremost, it's called La Maison Dieu. You live near
Yeah,
Paris, so you know that there is a hospital in Paris called l'Hôtel Dieu.
indeed. Yeah, right.
So the name of this card is based on the name of the hospitals of the time. It's very interesting because
Wow.
if you come out from the hospital, you're either dead or cured.
Uh-huh.
And they don't fall from the tower. Look at them. They're just there.
Yeah.
And the tower is even too small for them to live in it. And then
Hmm.
you have to wonder, did this ray of whatever come from the tower or into the tower? And why is the roof still attached to it? And what are these bubbles? And could it be a lighthouse in the night? Would all those be stars and it would be the light from the lighthouse? So what I love to do with a card, especially if you don't like it, is a questioning process. I just published in French this interesting little, very humble book called Le Tarot à Vivre. No, in French it's called À chacun son tarot, but it would be tarot to live by in Spanish and in Italian. And it has a card and a series of 7 questions.
Mhm.
Like, what does this card remind you of? And then you have space to write. If it were an event in your life or reminded you of someone, what would it be? What happened right before? What will happen next? What's in front of the landscape, at the back, above, under? Draw the whole landscape. How is the weather, etc., etc. And then it has a series of questions. So the questions are the same for every card. And then if you move the page to the other side, you have 7 proposals that are specifically linked to this card. And what I love about, and then you have a blank page with just a motto that I invented, like a little poetic phrase for the card. And what I love about it is that a lot of people are intimidated with a big book. But all of the tarot books that you've read and I've read are just random people who did that. They looked at the card and they started blabbering.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
If you follow this thread of simply asking the card questions, and if you hate the card, start like insulting it and saying the worst things about it. Just empty your imagination and your mind about the card.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I never would have connected it to a hospital. And when I bought this book and when I bought the deck, I was just going through like several knee surgeries, like 4 or 5 knee surgeries, and I was hospitalized. And this is the moment when I actually discovered tarot. So
Wow.
that makes a kind of an interesting connection in my mind.
What's even more interesting is that the next card is
Uh-huh.
the star.
And
And
that's
what
my favorite card. I
she
mean,
has a knee. Look at her. She has a weird
well,
knee.
she has a what? She has a
You
what? Her knee is bent, or what are you saying about her
Her
knee?
knee is bent, and in Jodorowsky's tarot, which is yours, I remember that the knee. Put it on the screen. You will see the knee has a weird shape.
The knee has a weird shape.
Yeah,
Okay.
she could have a problem with her knee or something. Look at her.
Wow,
She
cool.
was also André Breton's favorite.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, because
Show it to the screen, please.
the knee. Oh my goodness, you're right. The knee looks all twisted up.
You see?
Yeah,
That's
and this is like I still have a permanent limp from all these things, and it's
so,
broken, right? So I got broken in a way,
yes,
and
yes.
that's amazing.
So yeah,
So
so that's a very interesting illustration, because if you allow yourself to be subjective with the cards, you will go into your own history. You
yeah,
will go into myth in ways that it touches you. You will go into your psychology. You will go into something that that a part of you wants to talk about, that you weren't paying attention to. And that is exactly what we do with the tarot. It's an opener. It's an opener of who you are. So then the only thing that is required from a tarot reader, besides a basic knowledge of some language, of some structure, is to be a benevolent, good listener who just uses his or her or their best ability to be there to contain the other person's search for meaning. And it's huge. I mean, it's an art unto itself. It's enough. It has sophrology in it. It has Ericksonian hypnosis in it. It has a lot of, it has like art therapy in it. And absolutely enough for a start. And then weird things start to happen, coincidences, miracles, connections with incredible levels of clarity. And I do not know where that comes from. But we have to start from the ground up.
It's again, it's just allowing one to be very associative as well, right? Just allowing your mind to really,
To be
make
associative with
wild associations and
associative with the direction, because it's very
with the
interesting.
direction.
For
Yes.
instance, I wrote those 2 articles about Leonora Carrington for this book that's going to be published in Italy, and one was about tarot, and the other was about her relationship with the Gurdjieff school, because she was a student of Rodney Collin, and then she was a student of Christopher Fremantle, and she probably had a kind of weird experience with Collin, and she became very, very deep friends with the Fremantles, Christopher and his wife Anne, and she even created an enneagram of colors, and so so I went too far again. Where am I going? Oh my God, it was from the hearing trumpet. What was I talking? The thing is that when they comes into my mind,
We're talking about kind of, I mentioned associations,
yeah.
and then
One of the things that's very interesting, I was looking in the Hearing Trumpet, which is one of the books by Leonora Carrington, which is supposed to be a caricature of Gurdjieff, which it's not that simple. But at some point, this Dr. Gambit, which is supposed to be a caricature probably of Rodney Collins, says, "Oh, don't let your imagination go wild. Oh, don't dream, blah, blah." A lot of artists reproach that to Gurdjieff, but Gurdjieff himself said, the language of the higher emotional center is myth. So what is meant there is that it's not random associations, is that the mind is made of images and associations. If they have a sharp aim, if we want to play in the world of form, we can at least approach objective art by kind of like channeling the story into some form that has deep coherence connected with the laws of the universe. So that's one of the things we're trying to do with the tarot. It's not I invent a story for you, which is that just, my habit and subconscious like landing on top of yours. Is like we triangulate our conversation with symbols that you choose, that I have studied, and we try to make a coherent story from that. So that becomes folk music, that becomes craftsmanship, that becomes a humble art. But humble arts often are objective arts. That's the reason.
I love that. Yeah, humble arts.
Gurdjieff's music, there's so many shepherd songs, and because let's not forget that the tarot comes from craftsmanship, which means artisans spending hours to repeat a pre-existing model for something that will be used by people. So now when we read the tarot, we have to go over the gestures over and over again and put it in the service of someone, because that's the way we enter this lineage of craftsmen. And we have to be very humble. It's weird because the tarot creates insane ego-driven,
that's what I was going to say. It's almost like it's like counterintuitive, because people abuse symbolic languages because there's so much power there, right? So how do we keep it? Yeah, how do we keep it humble? How do we keep it as
I don't know. One of the reasons why I disconnected a lot from teaching and from the social networks and stuff is that over the years, I've seen lovely people who were my students in Argentina, Latin America, Italy, etc., become like crazy clowns on, Instagram, drawing the card of the day, which is like, just don't do it. I think you can't prevent people from the poison of their own ego. I'm not a spiritual teacher. I don't pretend to be one. Anyone who's on a path will know what they do. And also people from, the land, people who work with, my stepfather is a guitar maker. The other day I was dining with someone who cultivates clementines in Corsica. Some people have a sense of staying close to the ground. I try to teach the tarot in the way I live it. And with some people, it's wonderful because they understand it. But when you can't prevent people from going power crazy. There's no way. So I just become more and more invisible and transparent, hoping that that counterbalances the harm I've done to the world by maybe giving too many classes. I don't know. I don't. But for me, it's really a humble, very humble activity where you try to help someone with a game, with images drawn randomly from a game.
Yeah.
It works.
Maybe in helping them where they're at that particular moment.
Yes.
Rather than imposing some sort of platitude or thing on them that, like imagine it goes wrong when people get very dogmatic. I mean, everything goes wrong when people get dogmatic, right? About stuff and must have something to do with.
I mean, everything goes wrong, even when we try to be our best selves with our best intentions. We hurt people all the time. So,
Yeah.
At least let's try to do the least possible damage and stay playful and stay in love. I'm in love with this device. It's a long-term marriage. Sometimes I really want to throw it in the garbage can, but it keeps surprising me because human beings keep surprising me. And what's wonderful about reading the tarot is that because people agree to be vulnerable when they ask a question. I mean, it's such an honor when someone asks a question sincerely because they allow themselves to be vulnerable in front of you. So it kind of like invokes the duty of being the best container and listener that you can be at that moment, and also know that you can fail.
Yeah. But you're also providing insight for yourself. Like it's like they say about teaching is the best teachers are the ones that are learning all at the same time. So I wonder if it's like you're helping somebody else, or you're providing insight to somebody. At the same time, the insight is coming back to you.
There's at least 3 ways in which that happens. One way is when someone comes with the same kind of question you're struggling with, and you have to disappear from the ambition to answer because you know you're going to taint the answer. And then an answer comes that might be for you also. Then there's moments when you already kind of know what should be answered and you refrain from doing it and you trust the process of the person choosing the cards. And sometimes it takes you in a completely different direction.
Right.
Something. And then there's moments when it's an okay reading and you're not absolutely sure of what you're saying. And you kind of like feel the friction of maybe I'm not doing anything useful. And you want to really be able to give this person something, and something opens up in a card that you had never seen before. And the very device is giving you some new input. So for me, that's the 3 main ways that I keep learning. One is oriented on the consultant's questioning. Another one is refraining from feeling superior, which is one of my,
that's so important, isn't it?
flaws. And because I'm an older sister of a smaller brother who, of course, was the favorite. So that's the classical situation. And the third is the magic of the device itself. If you are humble enough to really like be super close to the complete failure, and then something opens up when you're truly desperate. That's the 3 main ways. Yeah.
That's very, very interesting. Yeah. And isn't that always how when an insight arises after a crisis of, in a sort of, you're in a fog of understanding, and then something, beautiful.
Yeah, this deep notion. I mean, we can juggle with these words, but the not knowing, not knowing, when I mean, for instance, my mother has dementia, and so it's a condition we know what the worst could be. And so I'm trying to prepare myself for it and so that she suffers as little as she can. But it's a very interesting illness in the sense it's not Alzheimer's, it's vascular dementia. So there's days when she's very present and then all of a sudden her condition aggravates, but then she comes back. So when you're side by side with someone like that, you literally don't know moment by moment. And now she has aphasia, so she can't talk, and now she can't walk, so it's very limited. She has this incredible beauty emerging from her being because she was so beaten up. She's still very conscious and she's losing more and more faculties. So there's like the innocence and the beauty of the being emerging. And she's insanely beautiful, but she's also terribly helpless. And the not knowing is like in your face the whole time, and it's beating you up, and it's like stirring so many emotions, and you catch yourself wanting to be the good daughter, and that's life.
Yeah, that's life. Yeah.
Truth of life. That's like having a baby. That's like falling in love with someone. I mean, I have this example now because that's my reality, but it could be any other reality. And we are buffered and we keep forgetting about it because it's so intense. And our bodies and our beings are so fragile and disintegrated that we don't know how to let all that electricity go through us and not burn us. So the tarot is a tiny little way of playing with that. If you agree to have people put their lives in your hands a little bit for like half an hour, and you are open enough to know that's actually what they're doing, then it kind of awakens that sense of very humble responsibility towards them. And then you have to get out of the way so that whatever knows works, speaks, and vibrates through you. And then you are the one who gains something from that encounter. It does not always happen because sometimes the field is too dense or too agitated for that.
Yeah.
But part of our work is also to create a field that will be able to evoke that in the other person, because it loops both nervous systems together like any kind of communication. This is
fantastic. No, that's wonderful. That's like I was just thinking as you were talking about how when we're self-obsessed, when we're really concerned with ourselves and our own problems and this and that, we're so blind. And then we get insight when we get lost, when we forget that, when we forget the smaller aspect of ourselves and allow for a larger field to enter us. And then that seems to be, I mean, I guess if tarot is working in that direction, allowing a larger field of intelligence to emerge inside of us, then it's working.
yes, larger.
And if it's manipulation, then it's dangerous. But
yes.
yeah.
What we're looking for is what is called in Sanskrit prajna, which is intrinsic wisdom.
Yes.
And one of the things, one of the ways we can look at the structure of the tarot is also, I mean, it's not built on that, but it's very similar to the structure of the koshas in the yoga, where you could say that the coins are like the annamaya kosha, the sheath made of food, and then the wands are pranamaya kosha, the sheath made of energy, and then the cups, because it's the emotional formation, is close to Manomaya Kosha, the sheath made of the sense of me, and which turns into the mind when it acquires worlds. And then the swords, which are the possibility towards thinking, are like Vijnana Maya Kosha. And so the trumps are Ananda Maya Kosha, Chin Maya Kosha, San Maya Kosha. So it means that the revêtement, the sheath we are in with the major arcana, the triumphs, is toward the very last separation from the formless with it, which is Satchitananda. So if you look at the major arcanas this way, that justifies the process that I told you to do, no, about the tower or the house of God, saying, no, it's not the tower of destruction, that's Waite's delirium. It's the house of God. So my body is the house of God. Anything that happens is the body of God.
And it's a healing space as well.
But it's also shaking you to the core at any given moment. You look at it from the perspective of Satchitananda, which doesn't mean to look at it from the perspective of like and dislike. It means, is there a possibility for bliss there? Is there a possibility for truth? Is there a possibility for conscience to my best knowledge right now. So of course you can turn the major arcana into characters in a movie, and it's part of who we are because everything becomes anthropomorphic.
Yeah.
But the true meaning is to guide us into this very subtle state where what is, and we're in acceptance. So that brings us back to the question is always egocentric and psychological, and the answer is always somehow Satchitananda. I can read a tarot with just the major arcanas or with the major and the minors. I never read with just the minors because Satchitananda has to be here in the game. But I don't necessarily lecture about that. I will say to a woman who's exhausted because she took the teenage children of her new love interest at home and she's like overwhelmed with the divorce and the kids and stuff, and she wants to be the best person she is, and then the tower comes in. And I can tell her, you're upside down. You want to kick them out. And life is chaos and life is shit.
Yeah.
Start from there. And it's not me speaking, it's the tower.
Yeah, and that's actually a breath of release.
Exactly.
By being there in that
And then
moment,
the next moment,
in what is, you know.
yeah, and then the next moment she's like, oh, her dad keeps them in his house in another, in another town 2 days a week, and he comes here to my place 5 days a week, and we could just invert that and it would work. I'm like, yes, she found the solution.
Yeah.
And the tower was the card at the center of her reading. And it's not like, crazy philosophy or high science. It's looking at the card from the Satchitananda perspective, from, of course, my experience in life as a woman, which is whatever it is, from being very deeply sympathetic with her and seeing that she's an excellent person, and also seeing there's a little bit of idealism in her question, and coming back to a very simple formulation.
Yeah.
But that
You said something very important there, I think, is that she figures it out for herself.
Yeah.
And so it also has to be a process of non-manipulation, allowing the person to really
or when they don't, because
have their own illuminations about it, rather than you imposing some sort of truth on them. Or
sometimes people are more silent.
Yeah.
So my strategy in that case is to offer a lot of possibilities that they can build from. Because you can't expect the person to be creative. Sometimes people are like, scared little mouse. So you have to kind of like lure them into their own solution finding process. It's also something that it's like being around children. When we ask the question, we're always in the child. In the child that has dysfunctional survival strategies, that has, that has been hurt, that is vulnerable, but that also has so much potential. So I'm not parenting anyone, it's not the point. But there is a way that you can both deeply respect and admire the energy in the child, and also, play a little bit with them so that they get to a place where you suspect that they might be more blossom into their power. So sometimes you also have to do that.
Good. So, well, maybe, is there anything else like that you would like to impart to our listeners about the tarot or about your work, or any final sort of, if we're starting to wrap this conversation up, any final kind of...
Well, I would say, if anyone is interested, because then there has to be some kind of practical guidance. I would say, if you're going to study the tarot, please try to at least have one tarot of the Standard of Marseille in your collection, even if you find it very hard to understand. But it's like the matrix of everything. And allow yourself to choose another or other decks that resonate with you. Never buy a deck on its cover. Try to find a place where you see all the cards before you buy the deck. Do not be intimidated by any kind of previous knowledge or anyone being more knowledgeable than you, and realize that it is an art of seeing, and that as soon as you start to shuffle the card, you're playing with a book that never tells the same story twice. I would say trust your sense of aesthetic satisfaction with the tarot. That's always going to be a good lead.
What do you mean by that? I'm not sure I understand that.
Enjoy looking at the cards.
Got it. Mm-hmm.
So if there's a card you don't like, maybe find its equivalent in another deck and find other versions of it so that you can come back to the specific version you have in your deck and understand. Sometimes, it's an eye that's not drawn the way you would want it to or something, but never allow yourself to be forced into anything. Tarot it's really playful, so you're allowed to play with it. And I think if it has teacher energy to it, which it might, keep knowing that the teaching comes in response to your sincere search. So maybe whatever I said made sense to you or not, it doesn't matter. Maybe listening to me brings you to a completely different deck with a completely different teacher, with a completely different vision of the numerology. And that's wonderful because it's one big, happy, dysfunctional family at the end of it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, great. Thank you for thanks so much for spending the time talking, and I look forward to your new book coming out. I hope it comes out in English, because
I also do. There's an agent in London interested, but it's always hard to publish things in English when you're from another country. There's like a little bit of a empire kind of situation. So we'll see. We'll see. I have one deck that has a booklet in English. I made a black and white, a colorless version of this tarot. So just the drawings. And Llewellyn and Lo Scarabeo created an edition of black and gold. I thought it was going to be horrific. And actually, it's not. It's quite beautiful. Maybe I could show it to you. But I think I have it somewhere in my ego library. Let me see. Do I? No, it's the only one I don't have, of course. Maybe I have it right here. Let me disappear for a second. No, I don't have it, but I have at least something. No, I don't have anything of it. Okay. I did not prepare this. I'm not a good seller. So you can look for Black and Gold Marseille Tarot, and it has a pretty complete booklet that's in Spanish, English, and Italian. So at least there is some written material, and it costs, I don't know, like $35 or $40. And I thought it was going to be really ugly because, to have a black background and the golden drawing, but it's actually really beautiful. There's a Rider-Waite version of it that I hate. It's really ugly. It's overcharged. It's like in your face. But the Marseille black and gold really works, and you can find some words of mine in it. So now I sold my book. It's Amazon and all of those platforms. And so, yeah, that's the only material available in English is that and the book I wrote with Jodorowsky.
Okay. Well, thanks so much for being here and giving us some insight into this mysterious thing called the tarot.
Thank you so much for the invitation.